Boker Tov, everyone, and welcome to our most recent edition of DIY Judaism. DIY Judaism this week is brought to you by Mama's Daughters Cafe Mug. Mama's Daughters Cafe, a Texas institution since before I even got here. So, our topic today is going to be how to make a tombstone Jewish. All of us, unfortunately, will have to confront a moment when a loved one has passed away, and we're going to have to arrange all the aspects of that funeral. Jewish tradition, of course, encourages us to bury our loved ones and to allow them to naturally return to the earth. Many people adopt the practice of cremation in our modern experience, but there's going to be some kind of marker for most people. And this is a daunting experience for many. The idea of how do I represent the individuality, the essence of my loved one after they're gone, and particularly, how do I honor and represent that Jewish individuality? But here today, we're going to talk about that. I'm going to show you how to embody in stone the Jewish identity and values of your loved one. Now, the stone itself, the idea of a marker stone, goes right back to the Bible. It's partially availability, but in any case, right from the very book of Genesis, we read that Jacob erected a marker stone over the grave of his beloved wife, Rachel. Unstated, but also part of that, is the similar practice that we have, particularly Jewish practice, of putting a stone on a grave when we visit it. This also goes back to biblical times, though it's never explicitly stated in the Bible. The custom arises out of the way that the ancient Israelites tended to bury their dead. What they would do is, because have really great shovels or excavators or things like that, the idea of burying someone deep in the earth was just too mechanically problematic. So what our ancestors tended to do from earliest times was to create a shallow grave and then cover the body with rocks. This is called a cairn, and it is something that was done by many ancient cultures. But it is the basis for the practice of leaving a rock. Why? Well, it's not only a representation of our devotion and that we visited the grave, but it's an act of grave maintenance. You throw a couple of rocks onto the cairn in order to counteract the effects of nature and gravity and all those things that tend to cause the cairn to decay. So that is the origin of that practice. And of course, metaphorically, the stone embodies something that our ancestors believed in, and we still strive for this day, and that is to connect ourselves to eternity, to connect ourselves to something enduring. We understand that God is that enduring force. Many of us in the modern age hold to memory as a symbol of enduring love. What embodies these ideas, these values of eternity better than a rock? Our ancestors looked at rocks, immutable, unchanging, enduring, difficult to modify, and they saw that as a metaphor for God and for eternity. That's why in the Hebrew Bible, we often hear God referred to as Tzur Israel, the rock of Israel. A foundation, an enduring force in life, something you can stand upon and rely on. So the stone represents a very important aspect of Jewish thinking from the very earliest. Now let's talk about tombstones, so grave markers. We create them for the purposes of reminding ourselves of not just that a person is buried here, but a particular person is buried here, and someone we value and we want to honor even after they're gone. That is the great Jewish notion that caring for the dead is among the greatest mitzvot because there's no way they can repay us. So it's an act of ultimate chesed, an act of ultimate kindness and love. And the tombstone is an extension of that. So let's go through. I'm going to use a slideshow to walk you through this. We're going to hit screen share, and there it is. And you'll notice I called this not how to make a Jewish gravestone, but how to make a gravestone Jewish, because no one expects you to carve your own gravestone or quarry it out of a rock. So we go to some company who does this as a specialty, and we ask them to make a gravestone to be placed over our deceased loved one. So how do you make that Jewish? How do you mark not just their individuality by their name, their date of birth and death, maybe an interesting quote, but how do you represent their Jewish individuality? Well, let's start with our slideshow and find out. So hold on there. There we go. Okay. Now we are going to, I can do this. I'm a 21st century rabbi. All right, here we go. What does a traditional Jewish grave marker looks like? Well, if you go to Europe, look at some of the earliest Jewish gravestones here in North America, it looks a lot like this. It is entirely Jewish in its assumptions. It is usually covered with Hebrew. It is loaded with Jewish iconography. And as was characteristic of the 18th and 19th century, you fill every empty space with something. Now, there is a dread, a horror of empty space. So we look at this today and we would call it a little uber-tchotchke. We prefer a more sleek aesthetic, a more understated one, but we can still forcefully and beautifully represent the Jewishness and the Judaism of those who have departed. So let's start on that. Let's start with this one. This is a tombstone for a couple. And the simplest way, we'll talk about symbols in a little bit, that one can affirm their unique Jewish identity is by putting their Hebrew names, their covenantal names on there. That is, in some ways, the scariest, even though it's the most straightforward way of doing this because we worry about getting it right. So, but here you can see it is Herbert here is Chaim ben Eliezer, and Arlene is Anna Porscha. I'm not quite sure about that one. Bat Gedalia, the daughter of Gedalia. So it's pretty straightforward. You want the first name of the person. If they're male, you want to put Ben, son of, the patronymic it's called. And then you want to put the name afterwards. It can be the father. It can be the father and the mother. It can be the mother if you prefer. But in any case, this designates a Jewish identity. Likewise, for the daughter, for a woman, it is so-and-so, Bat, daughter of whoever. Now, that means you all need to go out and find out the Hebrew names, not only of yourself, but of your parents. You should record this someplace. Traditionally, people record this kind of information inside a family Bible. We live in a digital age. Send yourself an email. Oftentimes, we rely on a certain older adult in our family, an aunt, a grandmother who remembers all of these things, but that's not completely reliable either. One of the reasons that Jewish congregations give their congregants bris certificates, baby naming certificates, bar and bat mitzvah certificates is so that you have a record of your Hebrew name, your children's Hebrew name, your parents' Hebrew name, etc. So consult with those and preserve that information someplace. Now, you should be aware that oftentimes if your family comes from a Yiddish-speaking background, oftentimes people will have two first names. This is what I call the Southern Jewish tradition. Instead of Billy Bob or Mary Sue or Bobby Joe or names like that, it'll tend to be something like Leah Ruchel or David Perel or something along those lines. Two names, which actually is helpful if you want to name your child after a deceased relative you want to honor and you got more than one, you can give double names. So that's part of the tradition. Most modern Jews follow the Israeli tradition, which is just a single first name. We're all Israeli now, so it's always David Ben Gurion, right? Or something along those lines. But if you do have that background, you want to preserve all the names. Now, to get beyond that, there's another simple thing that is included based on lineage. In ancient Israel, there were three classes of Jews. There was the Stam Israelite, the ordinary folks. But then there were the people who were hereditarily assigned the duty of serving in the temple. That's the tribe of Levi. And therefore, people to this day who have names like Levi, Levine, Lowenthal, those kinds of names, Levinovsky, are families that have some tradition that their ancestors were temple functionaries. And if you do have that tradition in your family, you want to give the name Levi, Halevi, and put that on the tombstone. It goes with the most immediate male. So if you're a man and you're descended from the Levite tribes, you're going to be so-and-so Halevi. If you are a woman, you don't get the title Halevi, your father gets the title. It's not fair, but that's how it works. So it's Leah Ruchel Bat Gedalia Halevi. So he's the Levi, you're in the Levitical family. Same thing applies to a Kohen, which means a priest, someone who was one of the functionaries whose job it was to offer the sacrifices and perform the major holiday rituals within the temple. Anybody with the name Cohen, Katz, Can, Kaplan, Tzedek, or variations on that, those people have a history in their family of being identified as Kohanim, as priests, that goes back to the temple. And so if you have that tradition in your family, it works the same way as a Levite, so-and-so HaKohen, or for a woman, so-and-so Bat, so-and-so HaKohen. And then finally, if you just happen to have a loved one who's a rabbi, he gets a title at the very beginning. The Hebrew phrase is Harav, the master, the teacher, so-and-so, Bat, so-and-so. That's how that works. All right. Now, beyond the name, there's two stereotypical features that are put on that extend the message of Jewish identity. If you look at this image right here for Aaron Steinberg, you can see at the very top below the Star of David, we'll get to that, are the letters Pei, Chipchak, Nun. Chipchak is the little thing that looks like a quotation mark. All right, and that is what's called Roshei Tevot. It's an acronym or an abbreviation, and it means Po Nikvar, which means here lies, or here is buried, or here rests. Then the name, as you can see, and then underneath it is another set of Roshei Tevot, a Tav, a Nun, a Bet, a Sadi, and a Hey. And this is actually an abbreviated version of a quote from the book of Samuel, which means, may his or her soul be bound up in the bonds of eternal life. Not quite clear what that means. Enwrapped in the bounds of eternal life, tied to the eternal. We can translate it a number of different ways, but it's a standard affirmation that we put onto tombstones of our hopes that our loved ones will experience the most positive afterlife possible. You may believe in an afterlife, you may not believe in an afterlife, but they're already bound up in your life. And as long as you preserve their memory, they participate in that eternal life. So it's an appropriate statement no matter what is going on. So this is a way of expanding your Hebrew representation. Now, we're going to go on just to say and remind you, don't make yourself crazy about this, all right? You've already done a lot. So you've done much to recognize your beloved person's identity. You do, however, want to be cautious about this because tombstones are easy to make mistakes and hard to fix. Spelling in a language you don't really know can be quite challenging. If you really want to do it yourself, the internet actually provides a lot of resources for how to spell certain names. All right, so you can probably find it there, including the Hebrew alphabet for that name, so that you can just pass it on to the Memorial Stone Company. Or you can consult someone who is a modern Hebrew speaker that you have some confidence in. Or if you just don't want to do it yourself completely, call your rabbi and we will help you get it right. And you need to double check it and triple check it, because once it's preserved in stone, you're talking a couple $1,000s. You don't want to mess this up. So now that I've made you nervous, let's go on and look at some other things. All right. So here is one that breaks from our tradition in some sense, because there's no Hebrew name here, but there is a Hebrew symbol or Jewish symbol on top of it. Adding a symbol is always a great way of conveying that person's values and identity. In this particular case, it's the oldest of all Jewish symbols, the menorah. 7-branch, not 9-branch. You dig up any ancient site in the Eastern Mediterranean, and if you see a graffiti or an image of a menorah, you know you're looking at a piece of Jewish property, something that was once Jewish. It is our oldest symbol. It's also a beautiful symbol. It is part of that tradition of the Ner Tamid, the eternal light, the continual light that burned in the ancient temple, a symbol of God's presence, a symbol of devotion and sustaining commitment. It is in some ways a stylized burning bush. So it can represent human memory. It can represent the durability of the Jewish people. It's a beautiful symbol and well worth putting on if that's what you choose to do. This next one, which has not yet been finished out, offers us not the oldest, but the most popular of Jewish iconography symbols. It is above the book, the open book, which, by the way, is also excellent, but that's not what I'm focusing on here. I'm focusing on the Star of David. Star of David is not the most ancient Jewish symbol. We've only been really using it for about the last 500-600 years, but it has become the most identifiable Jewish symbol. And so anybody just takes a glance at this, they know they're looking at a Jewish grave. If you want to understand the symbolism, there's a number of ways of interpreting this. The one I like is that really the 6-pointed star is 2 arrows. One is pointing down, signifying God's search for humanity, and the other arrow is pointing up, representing man's search for God or man's search for the ultimate meaning of life. Judaism is where those two things meet together. And on a grave, that's particularly a poignant message. This is a place where heaven and earth come together. You'll also notice that there is a modest, very attractive set of roses inscribed here. This goes back to the floral motifs we saw on the earliest tombstone we looked at. That's basically a Western tradition, but it's not a bad one. It's the idea that floral patterns symbolize eternal life, renewing life. So to put floral designs on your tombstone, totally appropriate. It represents, again, the continuation of life beyond the grave. Now, here we have less familiar but also worthy symbols to include. On this particular one, first of all, I'm going to mention something I haven't talked about up to this point, going back to words and Hebrew letters. If you look at this, you can see exactly what I talked about, the Pei Nun, and then you have a series of names here. And then you see the declaration of may their soul be bound up in the bonds of eternal life. If you look in between the name and the bonds of eternal life, it actually is telling you the Hebrew date of death. Quite common, not so common now, but done pretty consistently up until very recently. Now, of course, if we put the English name or the English date of death on there, then that information is there. It's less necessary because of the Western tradition of marking a gravestone with date of birth and date of death. You can include it. It's lovely to include it. It affirms the Hebrew calendar, but it's not as significant as the name itself or the affirmation or the statement, rest in peace. All right, let's go now to the image. The image actually, again, brings together a couple of different things. We see there the Star of David. We also see an unfurled Torah scroll, another wonderful symbol. But what I'm drawing attention to are the two lions. Now, suppose your loved one is a committed Jew, but not necessarily a religious person. Maybe they are, for one reason or another, not involved in the spiritual aspects of Judaism, but they identify as Jewish ethnically. They're very proud of that. Then a lion is the perfect symbol, because since biblical times, the lion has been the totem, the symbolic animal of the Jewish people. Each one of the 12 tribes had their own symbol, and we'll talk about for Kohanim and for the Levites in just a moment. But if you've got an ordinary Jew who identified strongly being Jew, you put a lion on there. All right, states and nations today identify with different symbols: bears, lions, bulldogs, unicorns, things like this. So our symbol, our national, if you were, or our ethnic symbol is a lion. So there you see that. I happen to love this particular grave. It's rather elaborate, but a sleeping lion, I think, captures something special. And the idea of putting that on a gravestone, because here sleeps someone. So a lion, good under any circumstances, especially good if religious symbols are really not important to that person. Now, I mentioned that there are other symbols for other tribes. Of course, the only tribe we really have a preserved tradition about that has existed up to this day, besides Judahites, which is why we all call ourselves Jews, is the tribe of Levi. And it is from the tribe of Levi that all Levites and all Kohanim come. So if you look over here on the left, the traditional symbol to put on the gravestone of a person of the priestly descent is the double Spock hands. All right, these are the hands of blessing. Long before Leonard Nimoy appropriated this for a science fiction show, this is how the priests from biblical times on would offer their blessings and serve as a conduit of blessing to the people. They would recite blessings and they would hold their hands this way. So when you see a tomb with these hands, that's telling you that this is a person who was of priestly descent. And it's a lovely symbol. Again, the hand watching over the body of the deceased also has a certain poignant charm to it. Over here on the, did I say right earlier? I meant left for the Kohanim. Over here on the right, on my other left, is the standard symbol of the Levites. So which one is it? Is it a platform? Is it a crown? Is it lions? Is it a stag? No, it's the thing in the middle. It's a laver or a pitcher or something that carries water. The Levites would have done a number of functions with such a such a pitcher. They would have used water to purify the hands of the priests and themselves. They also would have provided oil and even wine for the sacrifices. So a pitcher pouring out liquid is the symbol of the Levites. Now this one is a little more uber-tchotchke. It's full of exciting symbols. Again, we have our two totemistic lions over here. They're holding up a crown. What does the crown represent? Normally in Jewish iconography, it represents the Torah, the crown of Torah, though we can't be completely certain here. Maybe he's just a really, really awesome guy. And then we have the stag. The stag is a Jewish symbol from the Song of Songs. It represents the Israelite people in their own circumstances. Here, it may, I don't have the full picture, so I can't say for certain. It may be a pun. Maybe this person's Hebrew name is Svi, which is a stag, or maybe in Yiddish, it's Herschel, which is a stag or a deer. So it may be a pun on his name. But in any case, it's a charming image. The key for Levite is the pouring pitcher, but you can put all the Jewish symbols you want to. Have a great time. All right, some other symbols you can incorporate so you get multiple effect are these symbols here. Let's see. So over here on the upper left, we have this wonderful symbol where the po nikvar is put underneath a Torah scroll. Lovely. We saw an earlier unfurled Torah scroll. This one is a Torah as it's normally stored. And interestingly enough, it's stored in a keyhole. Why a keyhole? Maybe the message is Torah is the key to heaven. Could be. I don't know why they chose the shape. Maybe they were a locksmith for all we know. But it's charming. It's lovely. If you want to incorporate the representation of someone's livelihood, that's not uncommon at all. If we go over here to the right, we again see the totemistic lions, but we also see this time they're holding up the 10 Commandments. 10 Commandments, very popular. Again, to include, very iconic, easy to identify. You immediately look at this and say, oh, a Jew is buried here. You also see the six-sided star, so that they're covering a number of bases on this one. Perhaps my favorite at the bottom is a lovely practice. You don't see it much anymore. You can see it a lot when I traveled around with Bruce Cohen and we visited a lot of cemeteries. You actually saw a lot of this image here. And what is it? It's a hand putting a coin into a tzedakah box or a pushki. It represents the idea that this person in life was a charitable person, a generous person, a giving person. So it's a beautiful, specifically Jewish reference to character. And that doesn't happen so often. We don't often represent character on our tombstones, but this is a way to do that. So if you've got someone who's been a great supporter of a synagogue or Jewish philanthropy in general, someone who's always ready to give a handout to people, who was always there to support people in need, what could be a better symbol than this? So that, at this point, I'm going to stop because we could go on for a while, but these are the basics, is how you make a tombstone Jewish. Just remember in the end that these simple stones, of which the entire earth is made of, represent also not only endurance, not only eternity, but also unity. Our beloved is now one with the earth, but like the stone that sticks up out of the earth, we are connected to heaven. These objects embody things that go beyond our ability to even describe what it is we're feeling, but they're very important. So when the moment comes that you need to honor a deceased relative, this is your guide for how to create a tombstone that's Jewish. Yom Tov, everybody. Have a good day, and I wish you all blessings. We'll see what happens for our next episode of DIY Judaism.